I once had a friend who, on the surface, seemed perfectly kind. He never raised his voice, never insulted me, always polite and gentle. But every time I left a conversation with him, I walked away with a strange feeling, as if I had just lost a part of myself and couldn't quite name what it was. Maybe my confidence, maybe my peace. It all started with those comments disguised as care. "I just want what's best for you." The kind of jokes that made me laugh, only to realize later I'd just been diminished. Sometimes it was the way he'd ignore what I said, as if I wasn't truly present in the room. After enough of those moments, I found myself holding back, overthinking every sentence, and sometimes even apologizing for things I never did. Until one day, I asked myself, why am I walking more carefully on ground that's supposed to be mine? I didn't want to get angry. I didn't want to cut ties. I've never been good at getting even. But I also knew something important was slowly slipping away. A part of me was shrinking, in response to kindness that wasn't real, to a form of manipulation that made no sound. That was when I turned to Stoicism, not as a fan of philosophy, but as someone searching for a way to exist without losing himself. And the first thing I learned was this: not reacting doesn't mean you're weak. Staying silent doesn't mean you're passive. When you spot a threat and choose to stand still, it's not because you're afraid. It's because you've decided not to be pulled into someone else's toxic frequency. That's a posture not loud, but powerful. Stoicism didn't teach me how to win against others. It taught me how not to lose myself in the smallest, quietest battles that repeat each day, slowly wearing away your character if you don't stand firm. And if you're in a relationship where every interaction leaves you a little more drained, a little more confused, unsure if you're being manipulated, I just want you to know you're not alone. And you don't need to become cold, hardened, or cruel to protect yourself. You just need to see, to recognize, and to learn how to act at the right moment in silence. Let Stoic App walk you through 9 strategies of strength quiet, but sharp so you can stand firm against toxicity without losing the kindness inside you. 1. Reclaiming access. Guarding the fortress of the mind. Imagine you're living inside a fortress, not one built of stone, but a stronghold within where your most vital assets are kept. Your peace, your self-respect, your life energy, and the quiet space you need to breathe. The problem is, not everyone knows how to respect that fortress. Some people, somehow, slip inside without even breaking the door. They walk in as if it already belongs to them, and by the time you notice, too much of your inner space has been rearranged, too much noise has filled the silence, and too much energy has been drained without any clear reason. In modern life, access is a form of power. It doesn't need to be declared. It isn't granted in writing. It shows up in who gets to message you at any hour, who can call while you're trying to find stillness, who assumes they deserve your attention without ever asking. When you fail to limit this access, you're not just losing time, you're trading away the peace of your own mind. I once had a friend like Thathis, name was Alex. He wasn't a bad person, but every time his name appeared on my phone, I felt my chest tighten. Not because anything was seriously wrong, but because I knew the conversation would go on forever, filled with complaints and vague requests I didn't know how to refuse. It started with nighttime texts, then calls during meetings, then casual remarks like, "You're never there when I need you," just enough to make me feel guilty for not responding fast enough. Eventually, I began placing my phone face down, not to be mindful, but to escape. Toxic people understand this. They don't barge in like enemies. They arrive like familiar faces. They talk like someone who needs you and slowly make you forget what it is you're supposed to protect. That's when you stop being the guardian of your own fortress and become the doorman, letting others in, making space, accommodating demands, and sometimes letting them destroy it. But Stoicism teaches one thing very clearly. You may not control who knocks at the gate, but you can decide who enters the courtyard. You can't control every relationship out there. You can't choose your co-workers, avoid every noisy neighbor, or always sidestep relatives with heavy expectations. But you can control how much access they get to your inner sanctum. A Stoic isn't a cold stone. A Stoic is someone who consciously redesigns the boundaries of their life by shaping their environments, protecting their private spaces, and re-establishing lines others must learn not to cross. You can start with small acts. Limit time around people who exhaust you, even if they're old friends. Don't take calls outside your rest hour 7 from those who are used to having full access. Choose to meet in neutral places where you don't feel invaded. And above all, learn not to respond instantly to every message, because someone who can't respect your delay doesn't deserve your urgency. I once applied that with Alex. I didn't cut him off. I just moved our meetups to the weekend, stopped replying to messages at 10 p.m. and said clearly, I need Mondays to recover my energy, so I won't be chatting then. At first, he reacted, disappointed, frustrated, but eventually he either adapted or walked away. And I reclaimed a part of my peace I hadn't realized I'd lost a long time ago. Protecting your inner fortress isn't selfish. It's a deep form of self-respect. And when you begin to pull back access with strength and clarity, you'll discover not everyone needs to be close. Not everyone deserves your life force. And sometimes, distance is the boldest declaration that you've stepped back into your rightful role as the gatekeeper of your own life. Who will you open the gate for? And have you ever let someone too far in, forgetting that what lies within was always meant to be your quietest place? 2. Strategic silence. No need to speak when it's not needed. There are times when silence is a form of surrender, but there are also moments when silence is the strongest stance a person can take in the face of chaos. Not because they are weak, but because they've learned. Not every word deserves a reply, and not everyone is worth the effort of an explanation. I used to make that mistake. Every time someone misunderstood me, I jumped in to clarify. Every time I was attacked, I tried to explain, thinking that if I had enough logic, people would eventually see the truth. But the reality is, those who have already decided not to understand you don't need one more word from you. They don't listen to understand, they listen to win. Then one day, I was accused of something untrue. A sentence I never said. A tone misinterpreted. A group of people who reached a conclusion without ever asking me a single question. I prepared everything to clear things up, but when I stood in front of them, I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized they didn't want the truth. They wanted someone to blame. And I didn't need to clarify myself in a room that had no light to begin with. Stoic philosophy calls it strategic silence, the silence of intention. Not to escape, but to avoid fueling a battle headed in the wrong direction. Not to give up, but to keep your soul from being dragged into a meaningless storm. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let your actions speak for you." And that's what I did. I didn't argue. I simply lived right, did right, and let time be the loudest voice of all. It's surprising how, once you stop reacting, things begin to settle on their own. The ones who truly observe will see what's happening, and those who've already bought into false beliefs will keep sinking deeper into their illusions, no matter how many times you try to explain. Do you remember the story of Tom Brady and the Deflategate scandal? He was accused of deliberately deflating footballs during the 2015 AFC Championship, a charge that shook the American media. The country split in debate. The press erupted. Social media overflowed with outrage. But Brady didn't defend himself with words. He didn't go on talk shows to clarify. He didn't release daily rebuttals. Instead, he remained silent and kept playing like a champion. The following season, he came back stronger, won another Super Bowl, and let every precise throw speak in place of every accusation. People may not have all agreed, but they were forced to respect the way he stood firm in the storm without saying a single word. I started practicing that in very specific moments. When someone pressed me about something I didn't want to share, I didn't dodge and I didn't over-explain. I simply stayed quiet and smiled, like a gentle full stop. When a midnight message came from someone who thought they could reach me whenever they wanted, I didn't rush to reply. I waited till morning, chose a professional hour, and responded with composure, no apology, no justification. And when a co-worker hinted at something false about me during a meeting, I didn't argue, I just kept doing the work I believed in. A week later, the results spoke louder than I ever could. The right silence is a language stronger than any justification. It's not easy to learn, but once you master it, it saves you from countless battles that aren't worth fighting. And most importantly, it lets you keep your dignity, something that frantic explanations often throw away. Have you ever accidentally given up your own dignity just by trying to justify something that never deserved a defense? 3. Becoming emotionless in the eye of the storm. Sooner or later, you'll come to this realization: not everyone who comes close to you actually wants to understand you. Some people approach not to build bridges but to light matches. They test you with half-joking remarks, with a loaded glance, or sometimes just with silence long enough to shake your footing. What they want isn't truth, it's a spark of emotion in you they can control, manipulate, or simply use to feel powerful. I once found myself in such a moment with an ex. We ran into each other after months of no contact. She gave a faint smile and said loudly, "Still haven't figured out how to keep someone around for more than a summer, huh? Just enough for people nearby to turn their heads. Just enough to sting." But I simply looked at her, nodded, "Yeah," and kept pouring coffee into my cup. No retreat, no comeback. In that moment, I didn't let her set the rhythm of my heartbeat. And what I saw in her eyes wasn't triumphant, was disappointment. That method, Stoicism, calls it the grey rock technique. Not about being cold, but choosing to become bland and uninteresting in the eyes of those who crave drama. You don't react. You don't feed them energy. You don't offer up emotions they can exploit. You become a grey rock so dull that no one wants to keep poking. Stoic philosophy considers it a form of mindfulness, refusing to let your mind be dragged by someone else's moods. Seneca once wrote, "A wise man is not emotionless, but he is not controlled by the emotions of others." You can see, understand, and still not react. You can stand in the middle of someone else's storm and remain undisturbed. Not because you're numb, but because you've learned to keep your mind from being occupied by anyone but yourself. And if you still wonder whether this works, let me share a story. Remember Ben Affleck? In an interview promoting Batman v Superman, he sat next to Henry Cavill, who was passionately answering a question about the critics' harsh reviews. But Ben just sat there, staring off into the distance. Eyes blank, no argument, no expression. That clip later went viral as "Sad Affleck." People laughed. But on a deeper level, did you notice something? He refused to engage. No defense, no outrage. And in that silence, Ben Affleck became an unexpected symbol of grey rock facing public scrutiny with a kind of dullness that no one could twist or control. I started using that in moments that seemed small, like When a colleague made a pointed joke, I simply said, "I understand." When someone accused me of being distant, I gently replied, "I'll think about that." No sarcasm, no frown, no storming off to make it dramatic. I kept my eyes calm, my voice neutral, and let the energy in the room settle on its own. Strangely enough, when you don't offer reactions, people often lose the momentum to keep pulling you into their spiral. You can try this today. Choose one situation where you usually lose your cool, and instead of reacting by instinct, pause, breathe slower, and answer with a simple phrase, not to avoid the moment, but to avoid playing a game you never agreed to join. Remember this: you're under no obligation to explain your feelings to people who don't truly want to understand, because the truth doesn't need to be preached where no one's listening. Grey rock isn't easy. You'll be misunderstood as distant, insincere, even cold. But if you've ever felt exhausted from constantly reacting, if you've ever lost yourself just to match someone's fire, then you'll understand why being dull is sometimes a form of freedom worth keeping. Because freedom doesn't come from winning the argument. It comes from not needing to participate in it. So, the last time you had a strong reaction to someone, was it truly worth it? And if not, are you ready to retrain your reflex into silence so that next time you hold the upper hand? If this chapter hits something deep within you, don't hesitate to share it so someone else can carry this quiet shield too. And stay grounded. Stoic App will keep walking with you on this journey toward a calmer, stronger life. 4. Stand firm until they let go. Not every confrontation requires a struggle, and not everyone deserves a long-winded debate that costs you your calm. I used to think that to protect my stance, I had to explain it well persuasively until the other person nodded in agreement. But the more I did that, the more I realized. Some people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for weakness. They don't need a reason. They need a crack in your armor so they can bend your resolve until you give in, not because you want to, but because you're tired. Once, I refused to help an acquaintance because I was overwhelmed with work. He said, "You've changed." At first, I felt the urge to explain, but then I realized, the more I explained, the more I let someone pull me away from what I had already chosen. And the softer I became, the more they pushed. That's when I learned a simple but powerful technique: the broken record. No arguments, no justifications, no embellishments. Just repeat a single message like a scratched record until the other person runs out of things to push against. Stoicism calls this a form of behavioral integrity because the essence of firmness isn't just a skill, it's a loyalty to what you know is right. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Steadiness is a virtue not because it is hard, but because it keeps you upright when others try to bend you with their expectations." I remember a time with Jake, a former co-worker, who'd gotten used to offloading tasks that weren't his onto me. At first, I politely declined. Then, I explained. Finally, I got frustrated, but he never stopped, because he had learned that if he pushed just a little more, I'd eventually cave. Until one day, I simply said, "Sorry, I can't help with that. No more, no less." He frowned. I repeated it. He joked. I said it again. He looked disappointed. I held my line. No wavering. No emotion. No room left for negotiation. And then he stopped. Not because I won, but because I was no longer fertile ground for his pressure. I started preparing 3 firm responses ahead of time. One for when someone demands my personal time, one for when a relative tries to cross private boundaries, and one for when a coworker wants to pass off unreasonable work. Neutral phrases, polite but non-negotiable. And when I repeated them enough, I saw something clearly. The people who truly respected me understood. Those who didn't went on to find someone else to manipulate. And I came to understand this. Some people don't back off because you argued well. They back off because you're no longer fun to sway, no longer soft in the spots they used to press, no longer easy to talk to, meaning no longer easy to control. Not explaining doesn't make you cold. It means you've realized. Some relationships only function as long as you're the one backing down, and when you stop retreating, they lose the leverage to keep pressing, like a broken record looping the same phrase until the listener has no choice but to change the track. You don't have to shout. You just have to repeat until they understand that your position isn't going to change. So the last time you gave in, was it truly because you wanted to, or because you were worn down by someone else's persistence? 5. Disarming manipulation with humor. There's one thing manipulators truly fear: not fierce resistance, not sharp rebuttals, but someone who doesn't get angry, doesn't panic, and simply smiles in the face of provocation, as if they'd just been hit with a soft pillow rather than a heavy door. Because anger gives them the feeling of control, but calm humor, that throws them completely off course. I've been in that situation dealing with an old manager who loved to manipulate others with sweet sarcasm. One day, in a full meeting, right after I proposed a new workflow improvement, he smirked. "Oh, another reform idea from the guy who's too busy to attend meetings." The room went silent. All eyes turned to me, waiting for a reaction. But I just shrugged, smiled, and said, "Guess I'm not rebellious enough yet." No big laugh. But a few people chuckled, and more importantly, the balance of power shifted back to me. He didn't say another word. Because I hadn't played his game, and I hadn't made myself an easy target. To a Stoic, that's not wit for entertainment. It's a shield. It's the use of humor as an art form of emotional self-defense. Epictetus once wrote, "It's not what happens to us that hurts, but how we view it." When you learn to turn a jab into a joke, you reclaim the right to define your experience. You refuse to let someone else dictate how you should feel. You stand strong not with anger, but with the quiet smile of someone who knows they don't need to take every insult seriously to prove their strength. Remember Barack Obama's response to Mitt Romney during their debate? Romney accused him of weakening national defense by cutting naval ships. Instead of hitting back with fire, Obama simply smiled and replied, "Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets." One witty line sharp enough to break the tension, flip the narrative, and make the whole room laugh. It wasn't just intelligence, it was the posture of someone who wouldn't let another man's emotional storm shake his inner clarity. That's also how a Stoic fights, not with fists, but with inner command. I began using that strategy whenever I felt drawn into a conversation meant to hurt. When someone mocked me for always prioritizing work over relationships, I just smiled. Deadlines don't get moody. When a friend said, "You always seem so calm, do you even have feelings?" I replied, "I save those for horror movies. Real life? I prefer peace." Not every line landed perfectly, but almost always it helped me stay in control. I didn't get pulled into someone else's emotional spiral. I didn't let anyone hijack my mental state with masked attacks wrapped in false humor. You can start practicing this today. When someone uses sarcasm to poke at your soft spot, instead of freezing or lashing out, try replying with a light remark, just enough to diffuse their manipulation, just enough to keep your stillness intact. Remember, a clever line isn't meant to humiliate anyone. It's a way to reject becoming the emotional prey in someone else's performance, because sometimes a well-placed smile is your declaration that you're still steering the ship, no matter how rough the other side makes the waters. So, has a not-so-serious comment ever ruined your entire day? And if it has, are you ready to learn how to smile back so that next time you set the tempo? If you're ready to keep building that calm resilience, stay with Stoic App. We're right here with you, training each reflexo you can hold on to what matters most, your freedom within. 6. Build a circle of strength and support. Isolation is one of the most subtle tools used by manipulators. They don't force you to cut ties with your friends. They just drop a few words, just enough to make you hesitate, just enough to make you feel guilty for getting close to anyone else. Little by little, you begin to hold back your stories. You stop sharing, stop calling, stop reaching out, not because you don't need to, but because you believe you're no longer allowed to. I used to believe that. I used to think that sharing emotions was a burden to others. I used to hesitate before texting someone just to say, "I'm tired," afraid they would quietly sigh. It wasn't that I didn't have anyone around. It was that someone had made me believe, beyond them, no one truly cared. And so I pulled back, not because I wanted peace, but because I thought I no longer deserved to be heard. That's when I understood why a real support system isn't just about help, it's a lifeline that pulls you from the dark before you even realize you're sinking. I think of Barack Obama, a man who faced tremendous pressure both in and out of politics, yet never carried it all alone. He built a circle of trusted advisors, people who didn't flatter, didn't compromise, but always spoke the truth. They didn't hand out empty pats on the back. They didn't magnify his failures. They were simply there to remind him of who he was, every time the world made him question it. Stoic philosophy calls that the Stoic circle, a circle of strength. It doesn't have to be large, but it must be deep and clean. Seneca wrote, "You will become like those you spend the most time with, so choose them carefully." I began to rebuild that circle intentionally. I didn't wait for others to check in. I didn't hope they'd reach out first. I sent a message to 3 old friends, not to vent, but simply to say, "Hey, are you doing okay? I need to hear a real story." And strangely, when you dare to knock again on a door once closed, many people are still there, just waiting for you to believe you're allowed to walk in. I set up a monthly check-in. It didn't need to be big, just 3 people, enough to keep me from drifting, not to hang out, but to ask each other one question. What pulled you away from your core values this past week? If you've ever felt alone, don't. Make yourself be strong in solitude. Build yourself a Stoic circle. It could be a mentor, a friend who's steadier than you, or a small group where values matter more than image. Don't let the manipulator be the only voice you still hear each day. So, who are you surrounding yourself with? The one who lifts you up, the one who makes you doubt yourself, then calls it being honest? And if that answer makes you feel like you need a place to begin, again, stay with Stoic App, because the next chapters won't just help you understand the manipulator, they'll help you stand strong, like a true fortress that finally knows how to protect itself. 7. Quietly stepping away from pointless conversations. You don't have to win every conversation. In fact, the strongest people rarely try to prove they're right. They don't need to raise their voices to be seen, and they certainly don't need to stay in a conversations just to avoid looking like the one who gave up. I used to get stuck in friend groups like that, where every gathering became a drawn-out session of complaints, sarcasm, envy, and endless debates over things no one actually wanted to change. At first, I tried to offer suggestions. Then I went quiet. Then I began to notice myself changing in ways I didn't want. The weekly conversations didn't help me grow. They slowly made me question the very values I believed in, and so I left the group chat. No anger, no announcement. I just stopped showing up. To a Stoic, that's a necessary act. Graceful withdrawal, stepping away with calm, without a closing statement, without needing to win, without needing anyone to understand. Marcus Aurelius once emphasized, "Pointless arguments only pull you further from a virtuous life." And the truth is, the more you speak in a distorted dialogue, the further you drift from the life you want to live. Remember Ryan Reynolds. In an interview, when baited with a provocative question meant to mock his early career struggles and personal life, Ryan simply smiled, gave a brief answer, and redirected to something positive. He didn't tighten up. He didn't fire back. He didn't act like he needed defending. And just by staying composed at the right moment, he shifted the entire tone of the conversation. The host didn't try to corner him any further. I learned that not just from Ryan, but from my own quiet exits from unhealthy conversations. When you choose not to react, it doesn't mean you're avoiding. It means you're protecting the clearest part of yourself, the part that still wants to live with integrity, in a world constantly tempting you to explode over meaningless things. You can start practicing this today. Next time a conversation drains you, instead of enlightening you, try stepping back. You don't have to say, "I don't want to continue," if that feels hard. Just one sentence, "I think I'll stop here," or sometimes just silence and never returning. Withdrawing doesn't mean you're afraid of debate. It means you know where your voice is meant to be heard and where silence is how you hold on to your dignity. So the last time you stayed in a meaningless conversation, what were you staying for? And if it's no longer worth it, are you ready to step away so your voice can belong to a space that truly deserves it? 8. Forgiveness, but not forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean letting the other person return. And it's certainly not the act of a weak heart. I used to think forgiveness was reconciliation, a handshake, a long conversation where both sides walk away with a lesson. But then I realized, some people leave, so you can finally return to yourself. And forgiveness sometimes doesn't include their presence at all. I was once betrayed by someone very close to me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, cold turning away at the very moment I trusted them most. At first, I was furious. I thought about telling them how wrong they were, how cruel. But the more I thought, the more exhausted I felt. And then one day, I stopped. Not because I wasn't hurt anymore, but because I no longer wanted that pain to lead my mind one more day. Stoic philosophy calls it forgiveness for freedom. Forgive to release, not to reconnect. You don't forgive to let someone back in. You forgive so you can move forward. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It simply stops that memory from controlling you. Marcus Aurelius once said, "When you're angry, ask yourself, will this still matter a month from now?" And when I asked that, so many things suddenly became small too, small to keep carrying. I started with a letter unsent. I wrote to that person, not so they could understand, but so I didn't have to carry that rage into another night's sleep. I wrote everything down, then folded it, and placed it in a drawer I no longer opened. Forgiveness is a journey. Some days, you'll feel peace in your chest. But there will also be mornings when you remember that phrase, that look, that silence. And that's okay. Forgiveness doesn't ask you to erase your memory, it only asks you to stop using it to measure your worth today. Remember Johnny Depp? After everything that happened in the trial with Amber Heard, the accusations, the loss of reputation, and the long silence from those who once called him friend, Johnny didn't choose revenge. When the court ruled in his favor, he didn't go on television to mock her, didn't lash out online. He simply disappeared for a while, and then returned not on a talk show, but on a concert stage in Paris with a guitar in hand. That's how someone forgives, not to restore a relationship, but to end pain's control. And when you forgive like that, you don't need to say anything at all. I learned to keep the lesson, but let go of the grudge. Not everyone deserves to be welcomed back, but everyone deserves freedom, including you. And sometimes, to reclaim that freedom, you have to be the one who puts out the fire, even if you weren't the one who lit it. You can start today with something small. Write a letterer, a short note. No need to send it. No need to perfect it. Just be honest. Write what you want to forgive. Write it for yourself. Then fold it, or tear it up, or place it somewhere far away. Not to forget, but to stop being led by it. Forgiveness doesn't make you weaker. Forgiveness lets you keep walking lighter, straighter, and without needing anyone to walk beside you. So, what resentment have you been holding on to longer than necessary, and what is it quietly taking from you? Are you willing to step out of the prison of the past, even if it's just one small step today? 9. Focus on your goal and nourish the soul. There is a still truth, but one that cuts deep. Others can only control you when you forget where you're going. The moment your mind gets caught up in reacting, defending, or trying to please, you've already stepped off your own path. You're no longer living by your own trajectory, but putting your life on hold just to revolve around someone else's behavior. And that is exactly what manipulators want, to make you forget what truly matters. I used to be like that. I spent time responding to every subtle attack, explaining things that never needed explaining, proving myself to people who ultimately never cared about the truth. There were mornings when, instead of starting with a plan for my goals, I began with a defensive mindset, checking who said what, who meant what, who misunderstood me again. And then I realized I was no longer steering the wheel of my own life. I was just patching up the boat, afraid of water others might throw in. Stoicism taught me to shift that. Epictetus wrote, "Happiness doesn't lie in how others treat you, but in whether you live by your values." If you know what you're doing and why, you're less likely to get dragged into meaningless battles. If you're tending your own garden, you won't stop just to pull weeds from someone else's yard. Strong people aren't those who always win over others. They're the ones who don't lose themselves in fights that don't matter. Remember the story of Simone Biles, the gymnast who sparked global discussion? In the middle of the Tokyo Olympics, when the whole world was watching, expectations, pressure, flashing lights, Simone chose to withdraw from most events to protect her mental health. She didn't react to criticism. She didn't argue back. She simply said, calmly, "I have to focus on taking care of my mind." And then she returned, at the right time, won a bronze medal, and did it with a stillness that made every storm of opinion feel small. No justification needed, no need to win every argument, just the clarity to know what truly matters. That's when I began to change the rhythm of my life. Instead of spending an hour watching online debates, I used that hour to learn a new skill, something that could help me stand stronger in the future. Instead of replying to a vague, passive-aggressive message, I sat down and journaled about what was making me feel unsafe and what I could do to heal from within. I set a 30-day goal, not to impress anyone, but to realign the axis of my life, grow myself, care for my inner peace, and avoid everything that pulls me away from center. Not because I'm stronger than anyone else, just because I don't want to wake up to another morning feeling like I'm living only to react. You can start tomorrow or today. Choose one thing you want to nurture, not to prove anything, but to become. Choose one value you need to live by, not because someone demands it, but because you know, without it, you begin to fade. And every time someone tries to drag you into a swamp of negativity, ask yourself, is this really what I want to spend today's energy on? Because in the end, each of us is carrying a tank of energy. Will you use it to build her, to brace yourself, You've just walked through 9 strategies not to become hardened, but to protect the softness that no one has the right to trample. Not to strike back, but to stand firm. Not to fight the world, but to stop losing yourself in the invisible collisions of daily life. Manipulators don't always come with force. They come with familiar demands, with suggestions dressed as concern, with conversations that slowly make you question your own reality. But once you know how to draw the line, conserve your energy, stay silent when needed, and walk away without needing to explain, you're no longer a piece on their board. Stoicism doesn't teach you to confront, it teaches you to return to what you truly want to build, to what you believe is right. And when you stand in alignment with your center, the world may spin, others may manipulate, but you are no longer spinning with it. If you too are on your journey back to your center, leave a comment. I'm no longer being pulled. And if this video touched something you've once felt, share it with someone who might be walking through the same thing. Stoic App will still be here with you, guarding what's worth keeping.